folks fear feminism. Or, perhaps more accurately, folks fear their idea of feminism. Indeed, it seems as if a good deal of the population has a very specific idea of what a typical feminist looks like, what she thinks, and when and where she lives. Now, the point of my lecture today is not to discredit this picture, it is rather to broaden it. This is because the common conception of feminism, no matter what it is, could never be correct. This is for the same reason that a painting could never be correctly described by concentrating on a single brushstroke. Indeed, just as a painting is made up of thousands of brushstrokes, so too feminism is made up of 1,000 positions and viewpoints, some of which not only conflict with each other, but are in fact pointed in completely opposite directions. What I ultimately hope to show you today, then, is that there is no such thing as a typical feminist. Feminism, if we were to give it any definition, could be described as an attempt to rid the world of male dominance. Under such a broad formulation, the history of feminism can be traced back all the way to the philosopher with which both philosophy and this course began, namely Plato. In his political masterpiece Republic, Plato argues that men and women should be equally considered for political office. The rest, as they say, is history. In the last 50 years or so, however, this history has undergone some remarkable changes. Indeed, feminism has splintered. However, we can, I believe, get a handle on this splintering as it can be traced back to something very specific, namely Enlightenment ideals. The Enlightenment, this age of science that we began about 400 years ago, is in some ways a lot like a perfect creme brulee. We all know vaguely what it is, but don't really have much idea of what goes into it. Now, I'm not going to claim to be an expert in the Enlightenment, but I can try to inform you of some of its basic ingredients, some of the Enlightenment's basic ideals, and values. First, the Enlightenment tells us that equality or sameness is an ideal. It is something to be valued. Indeed, science tells us that humans are biologically similar and that philosophy tells us that we are equally rational creatures. Therefore, we must recognize that despite our seeming differences, human beings are fundamentally the same. We are all equal. Second, the Enlightenment values reason, for it is only through reason that we can rise above our particular lives and emotions and families and habits in order to see things as they really are. This is how science is able to discover laws like gravity, and how philosophy is able to discover laws like do not lie. A last value of the Enlightenment, the value of impartiality, follows from the values of equality and reason. Indeed, if one values reason and equality, one can never show favoritism, not even to oneself. The core Enlightenment ideals are thus equality, reason, and impartiality. Now, you might notice that these ideals are rather broad. They are so broad, in fact, that they can form the base for two very different ethical systems, namely Kantianism and utilitarianism. Indeed, both of these ethical systems are ultimately committed to equality, reason, and impartiality. It's just that they go about achieving these ideals in radically different ways. There's also a brand of feminism that is built upon Enlightenment ideals, one which we could call equality feminism. Equality feminism is pretty straightforward. It basically says, okay, so if we really value equality, reason, and impartiality, there's no way we can justify treating women differently than men. Treating people equally means allowing everyone access to the same opportunities. Treating people impartially means not allowing gender to determine whether or not one can vote. Equality feminism therefore says that if we were only to follow Enlightenment ideals, male dominance would be a thing of the past. Now, this way of thinking about getting rid of male dominance has been and no doubt will continue to be instrumental in securing opportunities for women. It is what got women the right to vote and will continue to get women jobs and political positions. However, in recent years, a new type of feminism has emerged, one that I will call care feminism. Care feminism challenges equality feminism by proposing that even if Enlightenment ideals were completely fulfilled, even if all people used reason and treated each other equally and impartially, male dominance would not be snuffed out. This is because, according to care feminism, Enlightenment ideals themselves are a form of male dominance. Now, you might ask, what is male about equality, reason, and impartiality? I think it is helpful here to realize that care feminists are not calling reason or impartiality male in the same way that the right to vote and being a CEO was at one point male. Rather, care feminists are trying to point out that Enlightenment ideals are a form of male dominance and that they force us to ignore certain values that only the women in our society can fully appreciate. For instance, consider equality. If we emphasize the sameness of everyone, we miss out on the fact that people really do have different life experiences, and that differences that should not be ignored. A woman is able to see this clearly as her gender and role as child raiser highlight her fundamental difference from people in power. Next, think about the Enlightenment ideal of reason. As soon as we try to be reasonable at all times, we forget all about our emotions and intuitions. Women, however, in their role on the home front, have learned a lot about emotion and intuition, and have figured out that neither should be ignored, as both are actually pretty important in making good ethical decisions. And lastly, think about the Enlightenment ideal of impartiality. If we are always impartial, we are forced to ignore the particular importance of those we love, especially our family. In her role as child raiser, the woman clearly sees that this attachment to our family should not be easily disposed. The care feminist thus comes to the conclusion that the Enlightenment ideals of equality, reason, and impartiality are in fact forms of male dominance because they force us to ignore certain values which women, at least women in our society, have especially keen insight, namely the values of difference, emotion, and particularity. Therefore, since it is feminism's job to eliminate male dominance, Enlightenment ideals must be rejected in favor of female ideals. What this means is that we get a very different sort of morality. Indeed, as soon as we allow difference, emotion, and particularity to guide our action, we wind up with an ethics in which we must simply go with our gut feelings, in which we consider the particular individual involved before their status as humans, in which it is ethically right to give preferential treatment to those we love. Such ethics will therefore never be able to offer general guidelines for action, as it is ultimately dependent on the particular people involved in a situation and their intuitions and emotions. To put it differently, care feminism advocates ethics that are based in care, rather than on rules. Now, such a base for ethics may make some of you nervous. You are not alone. It also makes a number of feminists nervous. Indeed, a number of contemporary feminist thinkers have stepped forward to challenge the claims of care feminism. We could call these thinkers post-care feminists. Now, post-care feminists are similar to care feminists. Post-care feminism, for instance, is perfectly willing to agree with care feminism that the Enlightenment ideals of equality, reason, and impartiality are a form of male dominance. However, post-care feminism challenges care feminism on the alternative ethical system it proposes. This challenge grows out of worries that many of you are probably already having. One of these worries is that care feminism offers no means of critiquing someone who is trying to care for others as much as possible. Because as we know, sometimes people like this can be severely misguided. I immediately think here of the sisters in the play Arsenic and Old Lace who, out of no motivation other than love, wind up killing almost everyone they know. The fact that a care feminist would have a hard time labeling these sisters as ethically misguided does indeed seem to be a problem. Alison Jaeger, a post-care feminist, therefore proposes some alternative ideals to guide ethics. These ideals attempt to avoid both the male dominance of Enlightenment ideals and the problems that follow from placing care feminism's female ideals at the very center of ethics. The first ideal she proposes as a viable guide for ethics is that of rights. While rights do not say that everyone is the same, they also demand that all humans be treated according to certain standards. Acting according to rights thus allows us to consider the common humanity pointed to by the Enlightenment, without ignoring the fact that, as care feminists point out, humans live very different lives. The second ideal Jaeger proposes is that of conversation. Conversation is clearly something in which both Enlightenment reason and female emotion have a place, neither of which is allowed to trump the other. An ethics built on these values of rights and conversation, Jaeger argues, will thus avoid the male dominance of the Enlightenment ideals and the weaknesses of care feminism. At the same time, it will benefit from the ethical insights delivered by both schools of thought. Indeed, in an ethics grounded on rights and conversation, our ethical decisions would ultimately be the result of a truly democratic process. They would be decisions formed through the commingling of emotions and reason, men and women's opinions, universal rights, and particular concerns. Personally, I find Jaeger's argument and post-care feminism in general convincing. This school of thought, like care feminism, does a great job of pointing out the flaws of Enlightenment ideals and the ways these flaws result in forms of male dominance. However, post-care feminism, unlike care feminism, refuses to completely reject these Enlightenment ideals and so retains ethical substance. Now, I do not necessarily expect everyone to agree with me here. Indeed, all schools of thought of feminism I presented today have their pros and cons, and each have and will continue to be helpful, even necessary, to rid the world of bias and hatred. But no matter which of them you agree with, I hope I have at least succeeded in showing you the breadth of feminism.